Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian graduate student at Columbia University, was arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) agents on March 8, 2025, at his university residence. This arrest, confirmed by the Student Workers of Columbia Union, came after Khalil had been an active participant in pro-Palestinian protests at the university the previous year. Khalil, a student at the School of International and Public Affairs, was a prominent leader in the protests advocating for a ceasefire and divestment from companies linked to Israel. ICE's actions appeared to follow a broader pattern of targeting international students involved in such activism, especially as it relates to U.S. foreign policy. Khalil's wife, a U.S. citizen, is 8 months pregnant and has been left without clear information on why her husband was detained. His lawyer has indicated that ICE officials were acting under instructions from the U.S. State Department to revoke his visa and permanent residency status. This arrest is seen as one of the first major instances of the Trump administration's crackdown on activists, signaling a troubling escalation of political persecution. Khalil's case has generated widespread concern over the targeting of political activism and the rights of international students to protest freely on American campuses. Khalil's arrest appears to be connected to his political activism, particularly his role in the pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University. These protests erupted in response to the Israeli military's actions in Gaza in 2023, with students calling for a ceasefire, a halt to U.S. military aid to Israel, and divestment from companies with ties to the Israeli government. Khalil, who served as a mediator between student protesters and the university administration, was not directly involved in the more confrontational actions, such as occupying a university building. However, he was deeply engaged in organizing and negotiating on behalf of the protesters, making him a prominent figure in the movement. The Trump administration's position on such activism has been hostile, particularly in the context of its anti-Hamas stance. The administration has linked support for Palestinian rights movements to backing Hamas, which the U.S. government has labeled a terrorist organization. This political environment set the stage for Khalil's visa and permanent residency revocation. His detention has been framed as part of a broader effort to deter political activism among international students, particularly those whose views may contradict U.S. foreign policy objectives regarding Israel. The crackdown on such activism reflects broader concerns about freedom of speech and political dissent in U.S. higher education. Mahmoud Khalil, originally from Algeria, is a Palestinian-American graduate student at Columbia University, where he studies at the School of International and Public Affairs. His background is marked by a deep commitment to political activism, which he has carried through his academic career. His wife, a U.S. citizen, is pregnant, and his arrest has placed significant emotional strain on their family. Khalil has been an active voice in student movements advocating for social justice. At Columbia, he became one of the leading negotiators during the campus protests, engaging directly with university officials and pushing for significant political change. Among his demands was the severance of ties between the university and businesses linked to Israel. His role in the protests made him a central figure in the debate over Palestinian rights on U.S. college campuses. Khalil's outspoken stance and involvement in the protests brought him into the spotlight as a leader in the movement, which further amplified his influence and made him a target for those opposing such activism. Khalil's activism appears to have made him a target for the U.S. government, which has escalated its crackdown on individuals supporting Palestinian causes. His arrest highlights the intersection of immigration policy, political speech, and U.S. foreign relations, showing how dissent on issues like Palestinian rights can trigger a broader political and legal response. The Trump administration's stance on Mahmoud Khalil's arrest and similar actions appears to be driven by its broader policy on immigration and its views on international student activism. The administration has long made clear its intention to crack down on individuals and groups it perceives as threatening U.S. foreign policy or national security, particularly those involved in politically charged movements. This was particularly evident in the administration's response to the pro-Palestinian protests that swept across U.S. college campuses in 2023 and 2024, following the Israeli military's bombardment of Gaza. The protests led to widespread calls for a ceasefire, divestment, and a halt to U.S. military aid to Israel, sparking strong opposition from the administration. President Trump's administration justified its actions by framing the protests as anti-Semitic, accusing student activists of supporting Hamas, which the U.S. government designates as a terrorist organization. As a result, international students involved in these protests faced scrutiny, visa revocations, and even deportation, with Khalil's case being a notable example of such actions. The U.S. government's move to cancel about $400 million in grants to Columbia University due to its handling of these protests is further evidence of the administration's intent to stifle political expression on campuses. Critics argue that this is not only an attack on free speech but also a political strategy to punish institutions and individuals challenging U.S. foreign policy regarding Israel. The arrest of Mahmoud Khalil has far-reaching consequences, both for U.S. immigration policy and for the broader landscape of political activism on college campuses. One immediate consequence is the chilling effect it has on other international students and activists who may fear similar treatment. This creates an atmosphere of uncertainty for those considering engaging in politically sensitive movements. If Khalil's arrest becomes a precedent, it could deter students from engaging in politically charged movements, particularly those that criticize U.S. foreign policy. Students may become less inclined to speak out on issues like Palestine, fearing potential legal or immigration repercussions for their activism. This shift could suppress political engagement on campuses across the country. The wider implications also extend to academic freedom, as the targeting of activists like Khalil represents a broader trend of government interference in campus activism. For universities, this presents a delicate balance between protecting their students' rights to free speech and complying with government demands, potentially placing higher education institutions in difficult positions regarding student activism. Khalil's arrest underscores the growing tension between U.S. political priorities and the rights of immigrants to remain in the country. As international students become increasingly wary of the consequences of their activism, the scope of intellectual debate and social movements could narrow, particularly in higher education settings. Khalil's case could spark wider discussions about free expression and immigrant rights.